The Butcher's Boy of Deadwood, Part 1, Where the Horror Began. In the summer of 1877, the people of Deadwood, South Dakota, gathered in silence beneath a blazing sun. On the gallows stood a 12-year-old boy, the youngest ever executed in the Dakota Territory. His name was Thomas Canfield, and what he'd done would stain that lawless town forever. 5 children were dead, each one found carved apart with terrifying precision in the back room of a butcher shop on Main Street. The newspapers called it the Deadwood child murders. But what made this story truly horrifying wasn't just the crimes, it was how he did it, calmly, methodically, like a student learning anatomy. And worst of all, he never once showed a trace of guilt. If you love dark history and true stories that feel more like nightmares, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now, let's step back to where this horror began. Deadwood, 1876, a town built on greed and blood. In 1876, Deadwood wasn't much of a town, it was a wound carved into the Black Hills of South Dakota, bleeding gold and drawing every kind of desperate soul the frontier could produce. Tents and rough wooden shacks filled a narrow gulch surrounded by dark pine forests. Mud filled the streets, rain turned everything into chaos. Yet thousands poured in, miners, gamblers, drifters, and thieves, all chasing fortune. The discovery of gold had broken the Fort Laramie Treaty, bringing settlers onto Lakota land in defiance of the law. By the time the government caught up, Deadwood was already a kingdom of crime. Gunfights were daily entertainment. Robbery, cheating, and murder were as common as whiskey and dust. The town's cemetery, Mount Moriah, filled so fast that many graves had no names, only nicknames or wooden crosses with question marks. Saloons outnumbered real businesses 3-1. Brothels lit up the nights. The Gem Theater, the most infamous of all, was a mix of gambling, women, and death. Even Wild Bill Hickok met his end here, shot dead during a poker game at the No. 10 Saloon. Deadwood had rules, but they weren't written down. Justice came from the barrel of a gun. And in this wild place, where adults died daily, the fate of children was rarely anyone's concern. The boy who walked in from the wilderness. In late March of 1876, a freight hauler named Silas Vaughn found a small boy walking alone on the trail from Cheyenne. The boy said his name was Thomas Canfield, and that his father, a prospector, had been killed 3 days earlier when their mine collapsed. Vaughn didn't ask many questions. Deadwood was full of orphans. He simply dropped the boy off at the town's new Merchants Association building, where a tired widow named Constance Pritchard ran an informal orphan placement desk. Thomas looked about 10 years old, small, pale, and quiet. His hair was dark, his eyes a strange gray, flat and still like river stones. He spoke clearly, but with little emotion. "Can you work?" Constance asked. "I can work," Thomas said. "Did your father teach you anything?" "He taught me how things come apart." It was a strange answer, but the woman assumed he meant mining, breaking rock, fixing tools. She sighed and wrote his name in her ledger, already thinking where to send him. The mines were too dangerous for a child that small. The mills were brutal. Then she remembered Garrett Hollis, the town butcher, had lost his helper in an accident. She led Thomas down muddy Main Street to Hollis's shop. The butcher and his new apprentice. Garrett Hollis was a big man, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a beard that looked carved from wood. When they entered, he was elbow-deep in the carcass of a pig, his knife flashing as he worked. "This the new boy?" he asked. Constance nodded. "He can work. Says he's not afraid of blood." Hollis grunted. "We'll see about that. Room in the back, 2 meals a day. $2 a week when he learns the trade. If he can't stomach the job, he's out." Thomas stepped forward, eyes fixed on the butcher's hands. "I can stomach it," he said softly. There was something unsettling about the way he said it, calm, certain, like he was promising himself something. That night, Hollis locked up and left the boy to sleep on a cot behind the shop. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, iron, and old blood. Outside, Deadwood roared, laughter, gunshots, piano music, but Thomas lay still, staring into the dark. He thought about the knife, the carcass, the way the blade slid cleanly through muscle. He remembered his father, the beatings, the rage, the mine collapse. He remembered the sound his father made when the beams gave way. He had learned from that sound. In the silence, he smiled, not with joy, but with understanding. Deadwood was a town where life came cheap. And in the butcher shop, surrounded by knives and shadows, Thomas Canfield had found the perfect classroom. The education of a killer. At sunrise, Hollis woke him. Time to work, boy. A hunter had brought in a deer. Hollis set to work, showing Thomas the right way to cut: slow, clean, efficient. Most folks just hack away, he said, but if you understand how a body's built, you can take it apart proper. Waste nothing. Thomas nodded, memorizing every movement. Every tendon, every joint, every sound of slicing flesh. To Hollis, it was butchery. To Thomas, it was anatomy. Narration tone deepens. Within weeks, the boy knew the trade better than any grown man. He worked long hours without complaint. He cleaned the knives with almost reverent care. Sometimes Hollis caught him staring, not at the meat, but at the pattern of veins, the curve of bones. It wasn't hunger in his eyes. It was fascination. Hollis shrugged it off. In Deadwood, everyone was strange in some way. But soon, the town would learn, this boy's curiosity was not harmless. It was the beginning of something unspeakable. End of part 1. Next time, in part 2, The Missing Children of Main Street, we'll uncover the moment Deadwood began to realize that something evil was living among them, and it wore the face of a child. Would you like me to continue with part 2, The Missing Children of Main Street, in the same tone and about 1,000 words? I can make it flow exactly like a dark historical docu-style YouTube series, perfect for narration with visuals and pacing cues. Movie Camera: The Butcher's Boy of Deadwood, Part 2, The Cold Room Secret. Opening hook. By the summer of 1876, the people of Deadwood had gotten used to death. Shootings, brawls, disease, the town buried people almost every day. But no one imagined that inside a butcher shop on Main Street, a 10-year-old boy was learning how to take life apart, one cut at a time. And what started as innocent apprenticeship would soon turn into something far darker, a secret that Deadwood wouldn't uncover until it was too late. Let's return to the story of Thomas Canfield, the boy who learned anatomy in blood. The quiet student, Garrett Hollis, the town's butcher, had trained dozens of boys before. Most quit within a week. The smell, the blood, the noise of saws and knives, it broke their stomachs. But Thomas was different. He never looked away. He stood perfectly still, eyes wide, watching every cut with unnerving attention. When Hollis talked, the boy absorbed every word. See these fibers? Hollis said one morning, pulling his knife along a deer carcass. Muscle runs in directions. You cut against the grain for tender meat. With it, if you plan to stew it long. Everything has an order. Heart here, lungs there, liver under the ribs, same pattern in every creature. Thomas's voice came quiet, almost innocent. Even in people. Hollis froze for a moment. His knife hovered midair. Well, he muttered, I suppose so. Never had reason to find out. He forced a chuckle and went back to work, but something about that question stayed in his mind for the rest of the day. The boy who never blinked. Weeks passed. Thomas learned quickly, too quickly. He could skin, clean, and section animals with the precision of a man twice his age. He memorized every bone, every joint, every muscle. Hollis was impressed, but sometimes, late at night, he caught the boy standing over a carcass long after the work was done, just staring at it. And the questions kept coming. How long does the heart keep beating after you cut it out? Can you tell how old a wound is? What happens if a vein is sliced instead of an artery? Hollis told himself it was just curiosity, maybe trauma from losing his father. But deep down, something about Thomas's calmness chilled him. Still, work was work, and the boy never complained, never slacked. So Hollis let him be. He didn't know that his shop had already become part of a darker business in Deadwood. The midnight delivery. One night in late April, Thomas woke to the sound of voices outside the shop. He crept to a crack in the wooden wall and peeked through. Under the faint glow of a lantern, two men stood with Garrett Hollis. They carried something heavy, wrapped tight in canvas and tied with rope. Money changed hands. Hollis didn't ask questions. He just took the bundle and carried it into the cold room, a deep stone chamber carved into the hill behind the shop, where the meat stayed fresh. The next morning, Hollis was quiet. He sent Thomas on errands that lasted hours. When the boy returned, the shop smelled freshly scrubbed. The knives were spotless, and the cold room, usually open, was locked. Thomas noticed everything. He said nothing. But that night, when Hollis went out drinking at the Gem Theater, the boy stayed behind. Inside the cold room, Thomas waited until the street outside went quiet. Then, using a bent piece of wire he'd picked up from a local thief, he worked the cold room lock until it clicked open. Inside, the air was freezing and thick with the smell of blood. Sides of beef hung from hooks. Pork bellies, deer carcasses, and something else. Under a cloth on the back table, Thomas found what was left of the bundle. Hollis had already started his work, but the proportions were wrong, the bones too small, the shape too familiar. Thomas stared for a long time, studying the cuts, the careful way the flesh had been removed. The bones were clean, the organs separated. Whoever it had been, Hollis had made sure nothing recognizable remained. There was no fear in Thomas's face. No disgust. Only fascination. He realized then, this wasn't just meat. This was a lesson, a demonstration of how a person could vanish. In Deadwood, a body could become nothing more than scraps and whispers. And in that discovery, Thomas Canfield found his next education. A perfect student. The next day, Hollis noticed a strange energy in the boy. Thomas worked faster, sharper, more focused than ever before. He asked no more questions, he already knew the answers. He studied Hollis's every move, which knives to use for which cuts, how to remove muscle without leaving traces, how to pack scraps for disposal. Hollis mistook it for passion. "You've got real skill, boy," he said one afternoon as Thomas expertly carved through a lamb's ribcage. "Steady hands, sharp eyes. You'll make a fine butcher someday." "I want to understand how everything fits together," Thomas said quietly. Hollis chuckled. "Then you're in the right place." But the butcher didn't realize what kind of everything the boy meant. The perfect opportunity. By June, Thomas was no longer just an apprentice, he ran the shop when Hollis was away. He knew which nights the man went drinking, which customers came late, and which corners of the building no one ever checked. He had access to every knife, every hook, every key. He knew how to clean blood from wood and how to make stains disappear. He also knew that Deadwood was full of children who worked in the mines, cleaned the brothels, or begged in the streets. When one went missing, people rarely asked questions. They said the frontier was a place of opportunity. For Thomas Canfield, that was finally true. Because now, he had everything he needed. Tools, space, knowledge, and most of all, no one watching. Ending narration slows. The first body wouldn't come until midsummer, and when it did, no one in Deadwood would connect the disappearance to the quiet butcher's boy with the pale gray eyes. Not yet. Next time, in part 3 The First Cut, we'll uncover how Thomas chose his first victim, and how the town began to feel a shadow moving among its children. Would you like me to continue with part 3, The First Cut, keeping the same dark, cinematic storytelling tone for your YouTube audience? Part 3, The Butcher's Apprentice. Headphone, eerie piano music fades in. Hook. They called him the quiet boy at Hollis's butcher shop. No one in Deadwood could have guessed what was really happening in that cold room behind the counter. By the summer of 1876, the boy with the pale eyes was already learning to kill. Narration. Thomas Canfield was only 11 years old that summer, small, polite, and always eager to help. He swept floors, sharpened knives, and listened to his master, Garrett Hollis, talk about the art of butchering meat. But Hollis didn't know that Thomas was studying something else. Something darker. He wasn't just learning how to cut meat. He was learning how to cut people. Scene 1. The first opportunity. It started one quiet Friday evening in June. The shop was closing, the sun fading behind the Black Hills, when a thin boy named Sam showed up. Everyone knew Sam. 12 years old, always running errands to earn a few coins, always hungry. He asked for Mr. Hollis. Thomas told him, "He's at the gem. Won't be back for hours." That was true. Hollis spent many nights drinking and gambling there. Sam sighed. No work tonight meant no supper. Thomas saw that desperation in his face. "I could use a hand," he said calmly. "Just moving a few heavy things in the cold room. I can pay you $1. $1 was more than Sam could hope to earn in a week. Hunger won over hesitation. He followed Thomas inside. Scene 2. The cold room. The cold room was dark and still, filled with the smell of blood and meat. Animal carcasses hung from iron hooks. "What needs moving?" Sam asked. Thomas turned, his expression calm. "Let me show you something first." His hand moved fast, the motion smooth, practiced. And then, silence. "We don't need the details, only this." Thomas worked with the same precision he used on hogs and cattle. When it was done, he didn't tremble. He didn't pray. He simply observed, as if he had completed an experiment. Scene 3. Disposal. Thomas cleaned everything, changed his clothes, wiped the tools. Over 3 nights, while Hollis was away, he disposed of what remained, piece by piece. Some went into the butcher's waste pit behind the shop, mixed with animal scraps. Some he buried outside of town. The rest stayed in the cold room, hidden among the real meat. When Hollis saw them, he never suspected a thing. By the time anyone noticed Sam was missing, Deadwood had already moved on. People vanished all the time in that town. Scene 4. The second victim. A month later, in July, Thomas found another. Her name was Margaret, a 9-year-old girl who slept behind the Chinese laundry. Thomas gave her food a few times, speaking kindly. She trusted him. One evening, he told her he had something saved for her. "Good meat, just for you." He led her to the cold room. This time, he worked even faster. More efficiently. Experience had taught him how to do it right. And once again, the girl simply vanished. Deadwood forgot her too, but one man was starting to notice small changes, Garrett Hollis. Scene 5. Hollis's unease. At first, it was little things. The knives were rearranged. The cold room seemed slightly disturbed after hours. And Thomas, the quiet, obedient boy, had started asking strange questions. "How long does blood stay liquid after the heart stops?" he asked one day, not looking up from the beef he was cutting. Hollis hesitated. "Depends on the temperature." "Why?" Thomas only said, "Just want to understand better. So I can work better." That night, Hollis poured himself whiskey and tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. But he couldn't forget the way the boy looked at people, studying them, like meat on a hook. Scene 6. The third disappearance. In September, Thomas met another boy, Joseph, about 10 years old, working at the stamp mill. Joseph's hand had been crushed by a machine. The wound was infected, swollen, black at the edges. Thomas saw him and thought, perfect. No one would look for a dying child. He befriended Joseph, shared food, and when the infection worsened, offered to help. "My father was a doctor," Thomas lied. "I can fix it." That night, Joseph followed him to the shop. And, as before, he never left. Scene 7. Rumors in town. By autumn, 3 children had gone missing. In any other town, people would have panicked. But Deadwood was wild, a place of drifters, miners, gamblers, and ghosts. People disappeared every week. Still, Constance Pritchard, who kept the orphan records, began to notice. She mentioned it to Hollis while he delivered meat. 3 children gone since summer, she said quietly. Sam Ridley, Margaret Chen, Joseph Tibbs. All under 12. Hollis forced a shrug. "Kids leave Deadwood all the time. It's rough country." But her eyes said she didn't believe it. And now Hollis couldn't stop thinking. Scene 8. Hollis's doubt. That night, Hollis stayed late at the shop, watching Thomas work. The boy was cutting up a pig, calm, focused, his hands moving like a craftsman's. There was nothing strange in his movements, yet something about his stillness chilled Hollis to the bone. He finally said, "You remember that boy, Sam? Used to run errands." Thomas looked up, eyes pale and steady. "I remember. He came once looking for work." "Just once?" Hollis asked. "Yes. You were at the gem. I told him to come back later. He never did." The boy's voice was so calm, so sure, that Hollis almost believed him. But later that night, Hollis opened the cold room and searched every hook, every shelf. He found nothing out of place. And yet, something in the air felt wrong. He left quickly, pretending he didn't notice the faint smell that wasn't quite pork. Scene 9. Winter silence. When winter came, Deadwood's chaos slowed. Snow buried the streets. Prospectors left. Thomas worked as always, quiet, efficient, polite. Hollis relied on him more than ever. To everyone else, he was just the butcher's boy. But in that frozen town, something monstrous was learning patience. He waited, watched, planned. By spring, he would begin again, smarter, faster, and even more careful. But Deadwood was changing too. The law was coming, and a Pinkerton agent named Robert Becker was already on his way. Headphone music fades out. To be continued in Part 4, The Pinkerton. Would you like me to? Checkmark A. Make it formatted as a YouTube script with narrator cues, sound music directions, and pacing breaks ready for voiceover narration. Or, checkmark B. Keep it as a short story narration style for your YouTube video description or visual text overlays. This will help me tailor Part 4 perfectly for your horror series. Part 4, The Pinkerton. Headphone low drums fade in, a cold wind howls. Hook. By the spring of 1877, Deadwood was still wild. But for the first time, the law was coming. And among the gamblers, thieves, and killers, one man arrived looking for something far worse. A boy, a butcher's apprentice, and the silent trail of the dead he left behind. Narration. The snows melted early that year, flooding the narrow streets of Deadwood with icy mud. The miners came back, wagons rolled in, and the Gem Theater once again filled with music, laughter, and gunfire. But under the noise, something rotten still breathed. 3 children had vanished the previous year, and though most folks had forgotten, a few had not. Constance Pritchard still had their names written in her ledger. And she had sent a letter, one that finally reached the desk of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Scene 1. The arrival. Robert Becker wasn't a man easily rattled. A veteran of the war in a Pinkerton for nearly 10 years, he'd seen men do monstrous things, outlaws, smugglers, killers. But nothing could have prepared him for what waited in Deadwood. He arrived in late March, dressed in a plain coat, his revolver worn smooth from use. His cover story was simple, a surveyor looking to buy claims. By his 3rd day, he already knew something wasn't right about Hollis's butcher shop. It wasn't the meat, or the smell, that was normal enough for a frontier town. It was the boy, Thomas Canfield, small, quiet, pale. Always working, always watching. Scene 2. The Watcher. Becker started by asking questions. Nothing formal, nothing that would spook people. Just friendly talk in the gem, in the laundry, near the orphan house. And over, he heard the same thing. The boy at the butcher shop. Works like a grown man. Strange eyes, that one. Doesn't talk much. One woman added, kids used to hang around there, before they disappeared. Becker said nothing, but he made a note in his small leather book. Greater than, Canfield, Thomas, possible link to disappearances. He began watching the shop. Every night, a light flickered in the back room long after Hollis had gone. Becker saw the boy come and go alone, carrying small bundles to the waste pit behind the shop. The detective knew what that pit was for. But something about the frequency, and the secrecy, didn't fit. Scene 3. Inside the shop. Becker needed to see inside. So one morning, he came by with a smile and a lie. "Name's Robert Baker," he said. "I'm looking to buy meat for a mining camp up the gulch." Hollis welcomed the business, showing him around the shop. Thomas worked silently in the back, his hands steady, his eyes cold and clear as glass. When Hollis stepped out to fetch paperwork, Becker looked closer. The knives were arranged with perfect symmetry, each blade sharpened to a mirror sheen. The table was spotless, but near the corner, he saw something strange, a small leather book hidden under a crate. He didn't have time to open it, but he saw the edge of a page marked with a drawing, a sketch of a human arm, dissected with careful detail. Becker's stomach turned. This wasn't the work of a normal butcher's boy. This was study. Scene 4. Hollis's confession. That evening, Becker found Hollis at the Gem Theater and bought him a drink. They talked about business, supply, the hard winter. Then Becker said quietly, "You ever had trouble with the boy?" Hollis blinked. "Thomas? No, he's the best apprentice I've ever had." "Smart kid," Becker said. "Strange, though, kids around here gone missing." Hollis went pale. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at his whiskey glass. Finally, he said, "You think?" "I don't know yet," Becker said. "But I'd like your help to find out." Hollis nodded slowly. "Whatever you need. Scene 5. The Trap. 2 nights later, Hollis pretended to leave early. He told Thomas he was heading to the Gem, but instead, he met Becker behind the shop. From the alley, they watched the back door. The light came on. Thomas entered the cold room. For nearly an hour, there was only silence. Then, a shape moved. Thomas dragged something heavy across the floor. Becker signaled Hollis to stay put and crept closer. Through the slats of the door, he saw it, a small body on the table. A boy, still breathing, weakly struggling. Thomas held a knife in one hand, a calm expression on his face, whispering something Becker couldn't hear. That was enough. Becker kicked the door open. "Stop right there," he shouted, revolver drawn. Thomas froze, then turned, slow as ice. His face showed no fear, only irritation. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Scene 6. The cold room confrontation. Hollis stumbled in behind Becker, his face white. "Thomas, what have you done?" Thomas glanced at the knife, then back at Hollis. "Exactly what you taught me," he said. "To cut clean, to waste nothing." Becker stepped forward, put the knife down. Thomas tilted his head, like a curious animal. "You'll shoot me if I don't." "That's right." Thomas smiled. "A small, empty thing. Then you should shoot." He dropped the knife. But when Becker moved to cuff him, Thomas lunged. The boy's hand shot toward Becker's throat with impossible speed. The detective fired once. The shot echoed like thunder in the cold room. Thomas fell. Even then, his eyes stayed open, bright, clear, unblinking. And he smiled again. Scene 7. Aftermath. The boy on the table was alive, barely. Becker and Hollis carried him out, called for help. He survived, though his mind never recovered enough to speak clearly. When the authorities searched the shop, they found what Becker had suspected: bones buried behind the building, scraps mixed with animal remains, sketches of anatomy hidden in a small notebook. Thomas's drawings were precise, labeled in neat handwriting. Each one marked, "Observation." There were at least 6 names written there. 3 of them were known. The others, no one ever identified. Scene 8. The town's silence. Deadwood didn't like to talk about what happened. The official story was simple: a disturbed boy. A tragedy. The shop stayed closed for months. Hollis left town the next spring, heading east. Becker filed his report and moved on to other cases, though he never forgot the look in the boy's eyes. Years later, in his retirement, he would still wake at night remembering that cold smile, the one that said he wasn't finished. Because after Thomas fell, the body was taken to the small clinic by the creek. And when the doctor checked on him at dawn, the bed was empty, only a smear of blood on the window ledge. Headphone wind rises, faint sound of a child's laugh fades in. To be continued in Part 5, The Ghost of the Gulch. Would you like Part 5 to continue with the same realistic historical tone, the horror grounded in human evil, or should it shift slightly towards supernatural horror, as if Thomas's spirit or influence begins haunting Deadwood after his disappearance? Part 5, The Ghost of the Gulch. Headphone, soft wind, a low hum, the sound of a dripping blade. Hook. They said the butcher boy was dead. They said the Pinkerton shot him clean through the heart. But Deadwood's Knights said otherwise. Because some things don't stay buried. Not in a town built on gold, blood, and secrets. Narration. The year was 1877. The snow had melted, the saloons were full again, and the story of Thomas Canfield had already become a rumor. Some said he'd run off into the hills, wounded but alive. Others said his ghost haunted the butcher shop, whispering in the cold room where the meat still hung. Garrett Hollis left Deadwood that spring, taking only what he could carry. He never spoke of the boy again. But those who worked near the old shop began to notice things. At first, it was the sound. A rhythmic scraping, like a knife drawn across bone. Always after midnight, always from inside the boarded-up shop. Scene 1. A stranger in town. In early April, a new man arrived, Father Alphonse Duray, a French missionary traveling west. He came to minister to the miners, but also to bless the building that townsfolk said was cursed. I do not believe in ghosts, he told them, only in restless souls. He stayed in the small room above what had once been Hollis's shop. The locals warned him not to. That first night, the air inside was icy cold, though the spring air outside was mild. The priest knelt to pray. And as he did, he heard a sound, faint, deliberate. The creak of a chain, and the soft drip of liquid hitting wood. He rose, lantern in hand, and followed the sound to the cold room door. It was locked, yet the faint red glow of a lamp burned behind it. "Who's there?" he called. No answer, only the rhythmic scrape of steel. He turned the key Hollis had left behind. The lock clicked, and the sound stopped. Inside, the hooks were empty. The tables clean, but on the far wall, written in something dark and sticky, were the words. Observation 7. Scene 2. The return of Becker. When word reached Robert Becker that the old butcher's shop was haunted, he didn't laugh. He'd seen too much in that room to dismiss anything. So he came back to Deadwood, tired, older, but still haunted by the boy's eyes. The priest greeted him gratefully. "I've heard the stories," Becker said. "But ghosts don't write words on walls." "Then what does?" the priest asked softly. Becker had no answer. That night, they stayed in the shop together. Becker kept his revolver close. The priest carried a crucifix and a small vial of holy water. Near midnight, the cold began. The air thickened, the lantern dimmed. Becker's breath misted in front of him. And then, from the dark, came a voice. Soft, calm, young, Mr. Hollis. Becker froze. He knew that voice. He'd heard it once before in the cold room, right before he pulled the trigger. The priest whispered a prayer, his hands shaking. "Who's there?" Becker demanded. No answer. But then came the scraping. Slow, measured, exactly as it had sounded that night months ago. Becker stepped forward. The light flickered, and for a moment, he saw it. A boy's shape, pale, thin, standing by the cutting table. Empty eyes gleaming like glass. "Thomas," Becker breathed. The shape tilted its head, just as the living boy once had. Then, it vanished. Scene 3. The investigation. By morning, Becker's resolve hardened. If Thomas's body had never been found, then maybe, just maybe, the truth lay buried somewhere near the shop. He and the priest began digging in the frozen ground behind the waste pit. They found fragments of bone, animal and human mixed together, impossible to separate. But deeper, beneath the old foundation, Becker's shovel struck wood. A crate. Inside were tools, small knives, a hammer, and a child's notebook. The pages were damp but still legible. Each page held a date, and a name. Sam, Margaret, Joseph. And beneath those, new entries. Observation 7, pending. Observation 8, subject identified. The last entry had a name. Written in precise, dark letters. Becker, Robert, Scene 4. The possession. Becker stared at the notebook, every muscle in his body tense. "He knew I'd come back," he said hoarsely. The priest crossed himself. "Then this is not a haunting. It's a claim." That night, the priest insisted they bless the cold room. Becker agreed, though part of him knew it was useless. They sprinkled holy water, recited Latin prayers, and burned incense. The smoke swirled in strange patterns, forming shapes that looked like ribs, spines, faces half seen. Then the light went out. Something grabbed Becker's arm, cold, firm. He fired blindly, the sound deafening in the small room. When the lantern flared back to life, he saw the mark, 5 bloody fingerprints burned into his skin. "Get out," the priest cried. "It's inside you now." But Becker couldn't move, his eyes glazed, his breath shallow. When he spoke, his voice was his, and not his. "He just wants to understand," Becker whispered. "He's still learning." Then he smiled, that same cold, perfect smile Thomas once wore. Scene 5. The fire. The next morning, the townsfolk saw smoke rising from the old butcher shop. By the time they reached it, the building was engulfed in flames. They found no trace of Father Duray, and only fragments of bone that might have belonged to Becker. The town said it was the Lord's justice, that the evil was burned away. But others whispered different things. Because after the fire, the ground stayed cold. Snow fell there even in summer. And when the wind blew from the gulch, it carried a sound, a metallic scrape, soft and steady. Like a knife, cutting. Scene 6. The new butcher. By 1879, Deadwood had changed. The law came, the town grew respectable. The old butcher shop was rebuilt, this time under a new owner, Elias Crane. He knew nothing of the place's past. Only that it was cheap, well situated, and came with fine tools left behind in the ashes. The first week went well. But by the second, he began hearing things. Footsteps in the cold room when he was alone. The faint sound of a boy humming. And once, a voice whispering from behind the meat hooks. Observation 9. Headphone, soft whisper. Child's laugh fades under the sound of sharpening steel. Narrator, final line. Deadwood buried many sins beneath its mud and gold. But some, like Thomas Canfield's, never stayed buried at all. They just kept learning, kept watching, kept cutting. To be continued in Part 6, The Blood Ledger. Would you like Part 6 to go deeper into the supernatural, with Thomas's spirit beginning to possess new butchers and spread his work? Or should it stay grounded and eerie, focusing on investigation and history with whispers of the paranormal? Part 6, The Blood Ledger. Headphone, sound of a quill scratching on parchment. A ticking pocket watch. Wind outside, faint thunder in the distance. Hook. They found a ledger in the ashes. Not of sales, not of meat, but of names, every one crossed out in blood-red ink. And the last page, it wasn't finished. Narration. By 1880, Deadwood had outgrown its sins. The gold rush had slowed, the fires rebuilt, the graves filled. But the legend of the butcher's ghost never truly died. Miners still swore they heard knives clinking after midnight, and drifters who passed through the gulch sometimes vanished without a trace. That spring, a new lawman came to town, Marshal Edwin Royce, a veteran from Kansas who'd seen enough death to stop fearing it. He'd come looking for a man named Elias Crane, the butcher who'd stopped answering his supply shipments 2 weeks before. When Royce stepped into the shop, the air felt wrong. Cold, still, too still. Scene 1. The ledger. The counters were spotless, tools neatly hung, the smell of salt and iron still strong. But Crane was gone. The door to the cold room hung open, frost clinging to the hinges. On the cutting table sat a ledger, thick, leather-bound, perfectly dry despite the damp air. Royce flipped it open. It wasn't a butcher's ledger. The first pages listed dates and measurements, body temperature, bone weight, heart rates. The handwriting changed halfway through, elegant, careful. On the last few pages were names. All with a note beside them. Joseph R. incomplete. Becker, Robert, finished. Elias Crane, transferred. Royce frowned. Transferred to where? When he turned the page, he froze. The next line read, Royce, Edwin, in progress. Scene 2. The visitor. That night, Royce stayed at the boarding house across from the shop. He couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Around midnight, he saw a lantern flicker inside the butcher's shop. Someone was moving in there. He drew his pistol and crossed the muddy street, boots crunching in the frost. Inside, the lantern burned on the table. The ledger was open, but now the ink was wet, fresh. And beside it stood a figure. Tall, shoulders bent, face half hidden beneath a blood-stained apron. "Mr. Crane?" Royce asked. The man turned slowly. His skin was pale as wax. His lips cracked and dry. But when he spoke, the voice was wrong. Too smooth, too young. "Not anymore," it said. He finished learning. The figure took a step forward. And Royce saw, for a moment, a boy's reflection in the butcher's glass, eyes black as coal, face cold and emotionless. "Thomas," Royce breathed. The lantern flickered, and the figure vanished. Scene 3: The investigation. By morning, Royce had the shop sealed. He brought in a local reporter, Lydia Vale, who'd written about the fires and the earlier disappearances. Together, they examined the ledger again. Lydia noticed something odd. The ink was mixed with ash. Each page smelled faintly of burnt hair and tallow. "Whoever wrote this," she said softly, "didn't use ink." Royce's jaw tightened. Then what did he use? Lydia met his eyes. "Blood. Scene 4: The mine records. Their investigation led them to the Whitetail Mine, abandoned since 1877, the same year Thomas Canfield died. Old payroll logs showed his name as a delivery boy, bringing meat to the miners before the cave-in that killed dozens. Among the miners' names were several that matched the ledger. All dead, all buried somewhere in the gulch. Royce felt the cold even underground. The deeper they went, the thicker the air grew, like breathing through water. At the end of a collapsed tunnel, they found a small alcove. A child's shoe, a rusted knife, and a wall etched with words. "I watch, I learn, I replace." Then came a sound, faint, rhythmic, metallic. "Scrape, scrape, scrape." Lydia whispered, "He's still here." Scene 5: The shadow in the mirror. Back in town, Royce carried the ledger to the sheriff's office, locking it in the desk. But that night, the book appeared again, lying open on his bed. A new entry had appeared beneath his name. Observation 10, proximity complete. And then, in smaller writing, "He watches while you sleep." Royce stared at the mirror. Across the room, something was moving behind his reflection. The faint shape of a boy, standing just behind his shoulder, smiling. The glass cracked, from the inside. Scene 6: Lydia's discovery. Lydia spent the next day searching through the territorial archives. She found something no one had noticed before, an early medical journal written by Dr. Alphonse Duray, the priest who'd tried to exorcise the butcher shop. It wasn't a sermon, it was a study. The pages described an entity formed from observation, a consciousness that grows stronger with every witness. "The more people see him," Duray wrote, "the more real he becomes." Lydia realized with horror. By writing about the murders, printing stories, and spreading the legend, she'd been feeding it. The butcher wasn't haunting Deadwood. Deadwood was building him. Scene 7: The hospital ward. 2 weeks later, Royce was found unconscious behind the shop, his mind shattered. He mumbled the same phrase over and over. Observation 11, in progress. He was taken to the Territorial Asylum in Yankton. Lydia went to visit him, carrying the ledger sealed in an iron box. Royce's face was pale, eyes vacant. When he spoke, his voice shifted between his own, and that same cold, youthful tone. "He's learning faster now," the voice said. "Every story, every whisper, every fear, builds him." The lantern in the ward flickered. The shadows stretched across the wall, forming the outline of a boy with a knife. Lydia turned to run, but the iron box in her hands rattled. Inside, the ledger had opened. A new line was being written by invisible hands. "Vale, Lydia, under observation. Closing narration. They burned the ledger that night. But the ashes didn't cool. And the next morning, every mirror in Deadwood fogged from the inside, as if someone were breathing on the glass. Some swore they saw words appear in the mist. Observation 12, Confirmed. Headphone sound of slow, steady breathing. A faint child's laugh fades under the sound of dripping blood. To be continued in Part 7, The Mirror Boy. Would you like Part 7 to focus on 1. Drop of Blood, The Mirror Hauntings, where Thomas's reflection begins appearing across other towns, spreading beyond Deadwood. Or 2. Scroll the Asylum Files, where Lydia investigates Royce's strange writings inside the Yankton Asylum and uncovers a deeper secret about Thomas's origin. Part 7, The Mirror Boy. Headphone sound of crackling fire, a storm wind, and a woman's hurried breathing. Hook. They said Deadwood's ghosts didn't travel. But glass has no borders. And once you've looked into his eyes, he remembers you. Narration. When Lydia Vale fled Deadwood, she thought she'd left the darkness behind. She took the train east to Yankton, her coat heavy with ash and guilt. In her bag, she carried the burned remains of the butcher's ledger, sealed tight in a tin box. But even ashes can whisper. That night, as the train rattled across the prairie, Lydia dozed against the window. In her dream, she was back in the butcher shop. The cold room door swung open, and the boy stood there, pale, calm, holding a lantern. He said only one word. Look. Lydia woke with a jolt. Her reflection stared back from the window glass. But it wasn't moving quite right. Scene 1, The Asylum. At dawn, the train reached Yankton. The asylum sat on a hill beyond the river, a sprawling brick fortress surrounded by fog. Marshal Royce was still alive, though barely. The doctors said he hadn't spoken in days. But when Lydia entered his room, he turned his head slowly, eyes wide. The mirrors, he rasped. Cover the mirrors. Lydia froze. Behind her, a cracked hand mirror on the bedside table shimmered faintly. Inside it, a boy's outline flickered, like a reflection of something just behind the glass. Royce's voice grew hoarse. He doesn't walk anymore. He reflects. Then his body went still. The mirror went dark. Scene 2, The Doctor's Notes. Dr. Arthur Finch, the asylum's physician, escorted Lydia to his office. He'd been keeping Royce under observation for weeks. Finch pulled out a folder filled with sketches, rough drawings of faces seen in mirrors, each labeled, phase, and numbered. Your lawman believed he was being watched, Finch said. He drew this. He turned the page. It was the boy, exact, cold-eyed, and beneath it, a phrase written in Royce's shaky hand. Every reflection remembers its maker. Lydia stared. Thomas Canfield, she whispered. Finch frowned. You know that name. She told him everything, the butcher's shop, the ledger, the shadows, the voice. When she finished, Finch's hands trembled. He stood, crossed the room, and covered the mirror with a cloth. Miss Vale, he said quietly, there's something you should see. Scene 3, The Basement Records. Finch led Lydia to the asylum's basement, a cold, stone corridor lined with file drawers. He opened one labeled Admissions 1874. Inside was a single yellowed document. A birth record. Thomas Canfield, born to Margaret Canfield, in Yankton Asylum. Mother deceased during childbirth. Below that, a note. Subject removed by Dr. Alphonse Duray for special study, Deadwood District. Lydia's stomach turned. Duray, she said. The priest who wrote those journals. Finch nodded. He wasn't just a priest. He was a surgeon, and an experimenter. He believed you could split a soul through reflection. Scene 4, The Mirror Room. That night, unable to rest, Lydia wandered the asylum halls. Lightning flashed outside. She passed a locked door with the label, Storage, Restricted. Inside, she found dozens of mirrors, tall, small, broken, warped. Each covered with sheets. She lifted one cloth carefully. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, pale face. Then, a second reflection appeared behind hers. A boy. He smiled. The glass rippled like water. Lydia stumbled backward as the mirror cracked from top to bottom. Blood, or something like it, seeped from the fracture, dripping onto the floor. A whisper filled the room. You kept watching. The mirrors began to hum, vibrating with low energy. Faces appeared in each, the miners, the butcher, Royce, all staring out in silence. In the center mirror, Thomas stepped forward. "I learned from you," he said softly. "Words make me stronger." The lights went out. Scene 5: The escape. When the orderlies found Lydia hours later, she was lying on the floor, shaking. All the mirrors were shattered. Every one except one, a small hand mirror, still whole, still gleaming. Dr. Finch wanted to destroy it. But Lydia begged him to let her take it. "It's the only proof," she said. "If we bury the truth, he wins." Finch reluctantly agreed. They wrapped the mirror in cloth and sealed it inside the tin box with the ashes. Then Lydia boarded another train, heading east toward Chicago. She planned to write everything: the butcher of Deadwood, the ledger of blood, the mirror boy. But as the train moved, she noticed something wrong again. Her reflection, faint in the window, was smiling when she wasn't. Scene 6: The newspaper office. Weeks later, Lydia's first story ran in the Chicago Tribune. It caused a sensation: the boy who lived in mirrors. Readers were thrilled. They stared at the printed sketch of Thomas's face for minutes at a time. Children cut it out, kept it in their pockets. Then people started claiming strange things. Mirrors fogging, voices whispering their names, ink on the newspaper turning red overnight. The story spread like wildfire, reprinted from Chicago to New York to St. Louis. Dr. Finch wrote Lydia a final letter. "Greater than, you've done what Duray began. The observation is complete. He's not trapped anymore." Scene 7: The photograph. A year later, in 1881, a photographer in Kansas developed a group portrait of newspaper staff. Every face was clear, except one. Behind Lydia Vale stood a small boy, perfectly sharp, though no child had been present. His eyes black, his smile faint. The photographer quit his trade the next day. Lydia disappeared soon after. Her boarding room was found undisturbed except for the tin box on her desk, open. Inside lay only shards of glass and a single new ledger page. Written in blood-red ink. Observation 13, publication. Closing narration. They say if you find one of those old papers today, and look long enough at the illustration of the boy, you'll see him blink. Not a trick of the eye. Just him remembering. Headphone sound of paper rustling, then a child's soft whisper, "Look closer." To be continued in Part 8, The Silver Glass. Would you like Part 8 too? 1. Follow Drive. Finch as he hunts for the remaining mirrors in the asylum. Psychological horror focus. Or 2. Shift to a traveling photographer in 1882 whose camera starts capturing the boy in every exposure. Supernatural spread focus. Part 8. The Silver Glass. Headphone, soft camera clicks, distant thunder, and the faint echo of a child's laugh. Hook. A photograph captures more than light. It remembers what the eye refuses to see. And once the silver glass takes his image, it never lets go. Narration. Kansas City, 1882. The world was rushing toward modernity, trains faster, cities brighter, cameras sharper. But progress, like everything that shines, casts long shadows. In a small photography studio on Main Street, Elias Ward prepared a new batch of silver plates. He called them his windows to the soul. He didn't yet know one of those windows was about to open too wide. Scene 1: The delivery. A wooden crate arrived that morning from Chicago. No return address. Inside, straw packed around a single glass negative, perfectly preserved, and a note written in slanted, old-fashioned handwriting. Greater than, for documentation only. Handle with care. The subject is difficult to capture. Elias held the plate to the light. The faint outline of a child stared back, eyes dark, expression unreadable. Across the bottom edge, etched faintly into the emulsion, were the words. Thomas Canfield, Observation 13. The name meant nothing to Elias then. But it would soon mean everything. Scene 2: The first photograph. That afternoon, a young couple came for a portrait, newlyweds from Topeka. They posed stiffly in front of the painted backdrop while Elias adjusted the camera and inserted the silver plate. The shutter clicked. The image was perfect, except for a small blur between the couple, like a shadow caught mid-motion. When Elias developed the photo in the red glow of his lab, he froze. There, between the smiling couple, stood a boy. Clear as daylight, his eyes looked straight at the camera. Straight at Elias. Scene 3. The photographer's curse. Elias thought it must be a trick of light, maybe double exposure. But when he checked the negatives, the boy appeared again, in every plate that had been near the crate from Chicago. He destroyed them all, or thought he did. But the next day, every new photograph still had the boy, always a little closer, always clearer. Sometimes his head tilted, sometimes he smiled faintly, but always those same black eyes. Elias stopped taking customers. He began covering mirrors, darkening windows, avoiding his own reflection. Still, every glass surface seemed to hold him. The newspapers called it hysteria when Elias burst into the Kansas City police station claiming his photographs were haunted. They dismissed him, until one officer looked at the pictures himself and swore he saw the boy's expression change. Within days, that officer vanished. Scene 4. The investigator. News of the strange photographs reached Drive. Arthur Finch at the Yankton Asylum. He had been following Lydia Vale's disappearance, and when he read the article titled, "The Photographer and the Boy in Glass," he knew the curse had spread. Finch boarded a train west, carrying with him a locked journal filled with the notes of Father Duray, the surgeon priest who had created Thomas long ago. The journal spoke of spirit refraction, a theory that souls could be divided like light through glass. Each reflection, Duray claimed, carried a copy of the original mind, and the strongest of them could survive without flesh. Finch believed Thomas Canfield was that experiment's result. He arrived in Kansas City determined to end it. Scene 5. The studio. Elias was nearly mad when Finch found him, pacing in a darkened room lit only by candlelight. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, each showing the same pale boy in a dozen different poses. "I didn't take these," Elias whispered. "They appeared." Finch studied the images carefully. He saw something new. In the most recent pictures, the boy wasn't just standing, he was moving, turning, reaching out toward the camera. Finch checked the negatives. The same. He realized the truth with cold horror. The boy wasn't captured in the photographs, he was escaping through them. Scene 6. The silver mirror. In the center of the studio stood a large camera, its lens cracked but glinting like a living eye. Finch opened the back and found a final, unexposed plate still inside. "Whatever you do," Elias pleaded, "don't touch it." But Finch had come prepared. He drew a small flask of mercury and poured it over the plate, whispering the Latin words scrawled in Duray's journal. "Greater than, speculum vinculus anime. Mirror, bind the soul." The air went cold. Every photograph in the room began to tremble. From within the plates came a chorus of whispers, hundreds of faint, childish voices murmuring the same word. "Look." The unexposed plate began to glow, silver light bleeding into the room. Elias screamed as the reflection of a boy stepped out from the camera, full and solid now, his form rippling like mercury. Thomas Canfield smiled. "You took my picture," he said softly. "Now I'll take yours." Scene 7. The flash. Finch raised his lantern, light bursting against the silver. Thomas recoiled, hissing, his form flickering between glass and flesh. Elias grabbed the camera tripod and swung, shattering the glowing plate. A blinding flash erupted, like lightning striking inside the room. When the smoke cleared, the boy was gone. Every photograph had turned pure white. But Finch and Elias both bore new scars across their hands, silver lines that shimmered faintly in the dark. Scene 8. Aftermath. Weeks passed. Elias shuttered the studio for good. Finch returned to Yankton, exhausted and unsure if they had truly ended it. But one night, as Finch sat writing by lamplight, he caught his reflection in the window, and froze. A small, pale hand rested on his shoulder in the glass. No one was there when he turned. He opened Duray's journal again, flipping to a page he hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a glued fold. It read, "Greater than, the subject cannot be destroyed. Only displaced. The silver remembers." Finch stared at his hand, where the scar still shimmered. Then the lamplight flickered, and for a split second, his reflection smiled without him. Scene 9. The traveling camera. Months later, a pawnshop in Kansas City sold a damaged camera to a traveling showman. He repaired it and used it for portraits at county fairs. Every photo he developed turned out perfect, except, sometimes, for a faint blur behind the subjects. A small boy, watching. The showman laughed it off, a curiosity for his customers. Until one night, when he tried to take his own portrait. The flash went off, and when the image developed, there were two figures in the frame, both smiling. Only one of them cast a shadow. Closing narration. The silver glass traveled for years, passed from hand to hand, town to town, each owner certain the stories were only superstition. But sometimes, in old family albums, among the yellowed portraits and faded smiles, you'll see him. A small figure in the background, looking straight out, and if you stare too long, he might notice you too. Headphone sound of old camera clicking, then a soft whisper, now hold still. To be continued in Part 9, The Reflection Hunters. Would you like Part 9 to focus on 1. Dr. Finch forming a secret society to find and destroy the haunted mirrors and plates, occult historical tone. Or 2. Modern descendants in the early 1900s who begin finding those cursed photographs in their family attics, time jump suspense tone. Title: Deadwood Butcher, Part 9, The Night of the Red River. Historic horror story, written for American YouTube audience, simple and engaging language, approximately 1,000 words. Hook. The sin of silence. They used to say that Deadwood was built on gold, whiskey, and blood. But by that summer night, the town discovered there was something even darker flowing beneath its wooden streets, something that fed on fear itself. And it all began when the river turned red. The story begins. By the time the first light of dawn touched the hills, Garrett Hollis was a broken man. His butcher shop, once his pride, had become a place of nightmares. Every corner carried the smell of something he could never wash away: fear, guilt, and the faint trace of iron that clung to the air like a ghost. For weeks, he had tried to pretend that Thomas was still just a quiet boy, eager to learn. But the truth had clawed its way into Hollis's mind. The questions Thomas asked, the precision of his hands, the strange hours he kept, the way he stared too long at the carcasses. It all made sense now. Thomas wasn't learning how to butcher animals. He was learning how to dissect people. And Hollis had been his teacher. That thought alone made the butcher's stomach twist. He tried to convince himself to go to Sheriff Bullock, to confess everything. But every time he reached for his hat, fear stopped him cold. Deadwood had no mercy for men who helped cover up a killer's work, even by accident. So, Hollis did nothing. He cleaned his knives. He drank whiskey. He prayed. And he waited. But Thomas didn't wait. The river turns red. The next horror began when the miners down by Whitewood Creek noticed something strange. The water ran thick and murky, stained a dull crimson as if the mountain itself was bleeding. At first, they blamed a slaughterhouse spill. Then a drunken fight. But when a tattered boot floated up to the surface, with a child's small foot still inside, the panic began. By evening, Sheriff Bullock had rounded up a posse. Lanterns flickered like fireflies as men searched the banks, turning over every rock and dragging the shallows with ropes. They found nothing else. No body. No sign of who had done it. But one man watched from the shadows near the butcher shop, his eyes gleaming with curiosity instead of fear. Thomas. The apprentice's secret. Since discovering Hollis's hidden trade months ago, Thomas had studied death with a devotion that bordered on worship. What fascinated him wasn't cruelty, it was order. Structure. The way life followed rules even in its ending. He believed that death revealed truth. And if dissecting animals taught him the body's design, dissecting people would show him the soul. The child by the river had been an experiment. A test. Thomas had chosen him carefully, an orphan who begged outside the saloon, invisible to the world. When the knife had gone in, Thomas hadn't felt rage or excitement. Only focus, precision, and afterward, he had cleaned up just as Hollis taught him, wrapping the remains with methodical care before sending them downriver. He expected guilt, but what came instead was a quiet satisfaction. He had seen what others refused to see. He had looked into the mystery of life itself. That night, Thomas returned to the shop as Hollis slept off another bottle of rye. He entered the cold room and stood before the empty hooks. The silence felt holy, sacred. He whispered to the darkness, "There's more to learn." The butcher's breaking point. The next morning, Hollis found blood on the cold room floor. Not from a cow or pig, but human, he knew it instantly. He confronted Thomas, voice shaking. "What did you do?" Thomas looked up from the cutting table, his hands folded neatly on his apron. "I'm learning, Mr. Hollis. You said yourself, every creature's built the same. I just wanted to see how far that truth goes." Hollis's face turned white. "You don't understand what you've done." "Oh, I do," the boy said softly. "You taught me everything I need." That night, Hollis packed his bags. He couldn't stay another day. He planned to leave before dawn, head east, maybe to St. Louis. But fate had other plans. The visitors. Just before midnight, the sound of boots echoed outside the shop. Two men stepped out of the shadows, the same ones who once brought Hollis their deliveries. Their faces were hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, but their voices were sharp. "You've been careless, Hollis," one said. "That mess in the creek's got the sheriff asking questions." "I swear I didn't," Hollis started, but a click of a revolver stopped him. "Doesn't matter. You clean up your mistake." Tonight, when the men forced him toward the cold room, Hollis's heart sank. But inside, instead of fear, they found something else, Thomas. He stood between the hanging carcasses, knife glinting in the dim light, as calm as if he'd been expecting them. "You brought another delivery," Thomas said quietly. "Good." The men froze. Then, before either could react, Thomas moved faster than a striking snake. The Red Room. What happened next would pass into Deadwood rumor for years. Some said they heard screams. Others said the sound was more like laughter. By morning, the butcher shop door swung open on its hinges. The smell that poured out made even hardened miners turn away. Sheriff Bullock found Hollis's ledger on the counter, pages stuck together with drying blood. In the cold room hung 3 carcasses, but none were animal. One was a man in a dark hat. One was his partner. And the third was Garrett Hollis himself. All cleaned, all labeled, each tag marked with a single word, written in perfect handwriting, lesson. Thomas was gone. Aftermath. The town buried Hollis quietly. Sheriff Bullock ordered the shop burned to the ground. But the flames revealed something strange, a tunnel beneath the floorboards, leading out toward the creek. No one followed it. Some said Thomas had escaped through it that night, vanishing into the Black Hills. Others whispered that he'd gone east, carrying his knives and his curiosity to bigger cities where no one would suspect a quiet boy with steady hands. But a few miners swore they still saw him sometimes, near the river's bend at dusk. Standing in the shallows where the water once ran red, his reflection smiling back with something not quite human. Closing hook for next episode, Part 10 teaser. The fire might have erased Hollis's shop, but not the hunger that started there. By winter, bodies began disappearing again, only now, far beyond Deadwood. Some said the boy butcher had become a doctor. Others said he'd become something worse. Next time, Part 10 The Surgeon of Shadows. Would you like me to make Part 10 Final Chapter, the grand conclusion, where Thomas reappears years later as a doctor with a terrifying reputation in San Francisco? I can keep the same simple cinematic narration for YouTube, 1000 words. Title: Deadwood Butcher, Part 10, The Surgeon of Shadows. Final part: Historic horror story, for American YouTube audience, simple language, 1000 words. Hook: The Return of the Butcher Boy. They thought the nightmare died in Deadwood's flames. But 20 years later, in the heart of San Francisco, the same kind of horror began again, this time, not in a butcher's shop, but inside a hospital. People whispered about the surgeon of shadows, a man who saved lives by day, and stole souls by night. The story begins. The year was 1889, and San Francisco was booming. Gold, railroads, and steamships had turned it into a city of glitter and greed. But beneath the shining streets lay an underworld of sickness and secrets. That was where Thomas Gray built his reputation. He was a quiet man with pale hands and steady eyes, known for performing impossible surgeries, removing bullets no one else dared to touch, repairing wounds others called hopeless. His patients called him a miracle worker. But the nurses had another name for him. They called him the surgeon of shadows. No one ever saw him sleep. He worked long after the gas lamps went dim, alone in the operating room, humming softly as he cleaned his knives. He kept a private cold room in the basement, locked with a key he never let anyone touch. And sometimes, when he thought no one was listening, he would whisper to the corpses under the sheet. Like he was still teaching them something. Echoes of Deadwood. One stormy night, a delivery man brought in a badly injured miner, crushed in a tunnel collapse near Nevada City. Blood everywhere. Broken ribs. No hope. But Thomas looked at the man's wounds and smiled faintly. "I've seen worse," he murmured. When the nurse left to fetch more bandages, she thought she heard the doctor talking again, low and calm, like a teacher explaining a lesson. Then came the sounds. The careful slice of steel. The slow, rhythmic breathing. The faint hum of satisfaction. Hours later, when she returned, the bed was empty. No patient, no body, just a clean table, and a single tag resting on the sheet. One word written neatly, "Lesson." The nurse fled the hospital and never returned. A journalist's suspicion. The story might have stayed buried, but a young reporter named Elias Crane was chasing rumors about missing bodies. Homeless men, prisoners, and unclaimed patients, all disappearing from city morgues. When Crane heard about the mysterious Gray, something in the name felt familiar. He started digging. There were no records of a Thomas Gray before 1872. No birth certificate, no school, no apprenticeship, but there was a missing child once, from Deadwood, Dakota Territory. A boy named Thomas Lyle, whose guardian, a butcher named Garrett Hollis, had died under horrific circumstances. Elias Crane knew a story when he saw one. The midnight visit. On a fog-choked night, Crane broke into the hospital's basement. The smell hit him first, not rot, but something clean and sharp. The smell of disinfectant and blood. He found the cold room, the same kind Hollis once used. Hooks lined the ceiling, and tables were set with surgical tools arranged like soldiers in perfect order. And on the central table lay a shape under a white sheet. Crane pulled it back, and gasped. It wasn't a body, it was a collection of parts, stitched and connected, a grotesque model of human anatomy, as if someone had tried to rebuild life itself. On the wall above it hung a small, yellowed photograph. A young boy standing beside a butcher, both smiling for the camera. Scrawled beneath it, "Everything has its place." Crane turned to run, but the door closed softly behind him. The surgeon speaks. "Curiosity," said a calm voice in the dark, "is the first step toward understanding." Thomas stepped into the dim light, his face older but unmistakable, the same cold focus, the same strange calm. "You came looking for answers," he continued. "So few people do. Most look away from death. Pretend it's not part of them. But you," he smiled faintly, "you looked too closely." Crane backed toward the wall, his voice trembling. "You killed those people." Thomas tilted his head. "Killed? No, I studied them. Death is simply a door. I'm learning what lies beyond." He reached for a scalpel. "And now, Mr. Crane, you'll help me understand one last thing. The fire of redemption." By morning, smoke poured from the hospital's west wing. Firemen fought through the blaze, breaking windows, dragging out patients. They found Elias Crane's notebook near the furnace, pages charred but legible. It told everything: the missing bodies, the secret surgeries, the cold room, and the truth of who Gray really was. But of the doctor himself, there was no trace. Only melted steel instruments, and a burned photograph of a butcher's shop in Deadwood. The newspapers called him a madman, a killer, a ghost. Yet some said he survived. The legend lives on. Years later, in New York City, a new surgeon began working at Bellevue Hospital, a quiet man with steady hands, a strange smile, and no past. He introduced himself as Dr. T. Gray. In the morgue, attendants whispered that sometimes the bodies moved after he left, as if they'd been touched by something that refused to die. And when a medical student once asked how he performed his flawless dissections, the doctor smiled faintly and said, "Simple. You just have to respect the design." That night, the student disappeared. Final words. The story of the Deadwood Butcher began with a boy's curiosity and ended with a man's obsession. Maybe he died in that fire. Maybe he didn't. But every time a hospital light flickers late at night, every time you hear the sound of a knife sliding across metal in an empty room, you can still whisper his name, and maybe, just maybe, he'll answer. Thomas Gray, the Surgeon of Shadows. If you enjoyed this historic horror story and want more chilling tales like the Deadwood Butcher, make sure to Cooking Knife subscribe for more dark history and true horror series. Like the video if you enjoyed the storytelling. Scroll comment below, do you think Thomas survived? Or was his ghost still out there, learning new lessons? Drop of Blood share this story with friends who love old American horror legends. Because some stories never die.